Hey all, before we start this episode, we have a quick content warning. This manga has certain themes and imagery that some people will find upsetting. If you're worried about these, please find the names of these themes in the description. Thanks. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to OCHATO, the fortnightly podcast where we drink tea and review manga. I am Jade.
Hi, I'm Ollie.
Hi, I'm Suellen.
Every 2 weeks, we pick a manga that one of us has recommended, and we read up to a certain chapter and discuss the manga with a gigaton of spoilers. This week, we are reading Berserk by Kentaro Miura. Did I say that right?
Probably. Kentaro Miura.
Thank you. Up to chapter 21, which is one more chapter than we discussed in the previous episode of OCHATO, because it ends perfectly now with the end of an arc. And before diving in, we must know the answer to the most important question: what is everyone drinking in their mug?
As per usual, it's decaf tea because we record this in the evenings and I like to sleep.
Me too. So therefore, I'm drinking, good old H2O.
Oh, delicious.
And I am drinking lemon, ginger, and manuka honey.
Oh,
The pucker one.
delicious.
Speaking of, I recently got the, I think it was the Yorkshire tea malted biscuit version.
What is
Has
that?
anyone had that? It's so nice. Got recommended to me by one of our listeners, Adila. She recommended it to me and I bought it, and it tastes just like those malted cow biscuits that I used to have when I was a kid. So nice.
I'm going to
But
need some of those.
yeah, highly recommend it.
Mm.
So we are reading Berserk by Kentaro Miura, and the official description by Dark Horse Comics is: his name is Guts, the Black Swordsman, a feared warrior spoken of only in whispers. Bearer of a gigantic sword, an iron hand, and the scars of countless battles and tortures, his flesh is also indelibly marked with the brand, an unholy symbol that draws the forces of darkness to him and dooms him as their sacrifice. But Guts won't take his fate lying down. He'll cut a crimson swath of carnage through the ranks of the damned and anyone else foolish enough to oppose him. Accompanied by Puck the Elf, more an annoyance than a companion, Guts relentlessly follows a dark, blood-stained path that leads only to death or vengeance.
So edgy.
First of all, let's start off with first impressions. Suellen, what were your first impressions of Berserk?
Yeah, I thought the art was incredible. I heard a lot of good things about it, so when I went in, I was quite biased, like already expecting for it to be like amazing, and it was. Guts always looked like he was winking because one of his eyes is like closed, like obviously something happened to it. And just some panels, like I think I just found it really funny. He'll be like on the ground, like naked, and he's like the full shot of him like with his eyes half open. It's like, ooh, yeah. I don't know where this is going, but which is right off the bat. Right off the bat. Love Guts. I'm not satisfied with like where we ended. Some of you obviously like already gone beyond the chapters we've read.
I think this kind of brings up an interesting point where we were recommended to read the Golden Age arc. Now, when I looked through the chapters, I thought that meant to the end of the Golden Age chapters, which is just before Nosferatu's Odd. That's not, as far as I can tell, the actual Golden Age arc. It's the chapters called the Golden Age. The actual Golden Age arc ends at chapter 94, which funnily enough is where I read up to. This kind of tied into the intro for me, where when I was reading it, on the prologue, I didn't really, like the art's amazing. I quite like the dialogue and everything, but I found it pretty like existential crisis-y. I only really got hooked after the Golden Age chapters, so the first few in the Golden Age arc. There's a lot more kind of camaraderie, as it were. And I really enjoyed that and got totally hooked and then read all the way up to 94, which at that point you've kind of set up, hey, this is Guts. Here's what's up. I'll try not to spoil any of it, as I'm aware neither of you two have read quite as much. If you were to like have the time and to want to read it and see what Berserk is really about, that would be a good spot to kind of go up to, though it is 94 chapters plus the prologue, which is a lot. So yeah, first impressions were actually not incredible, but then got a lot better once I hit the Golden Age chapters.
Yeah, I think for me, I read this a couple of years ago and then I sort of gave up on it quite easily because I sort of read the first few chapters and was like, this really isn't going anywhere. But I think once I hit Guts's backstory and how he came into this life that he is having now, I became a lot more invested and interested in how he navigates life and his relationships with other people, his fights, various comrades, various enemies. And I think I was just drawn in this time. And I think if I had the time, I would definitely keep on reading. I'd be interested to see how his fights pan out because we've seen him having an adverse reaction to Griffith when the hellet kind of arranged itself into an actual face. And then we see his relationship with Griffith first start with the Band of the Black Hawks. And that was really, really interesting. I sort of feel like they're going to have a big fight because it makes me wonder what went wrong between those two.
A lot of these kind of questions you get are really what kind of pull you in.
Yeah.
And the prologue can really help in that regard, where you've seen this kind of the state of things in the prologue and you're like, how do you get there? You know, how did they get to that point? And then through the Golden Age arc, going through these emotions and, you know, these actions that happen, it's really interesting having read the prologue, seeing how things progress. And even if you're aware where something's going to go, that doesn't mean it's any less exciting or interesting. And I thought the prologue was really good in that respect.
Yeah, when I read this, I kind of like, I don't know why, maybe because I read quite a lot of like shonen manga in the past or stuff, or even seinen ones as well. So I kind of get that his character, like at first, like I thought he's an arsehole, right? Because he's like, maybe you should just kill yourself, you know? I'm like, I was like, what the frick, Guts? But I'm kind of expecting that we probably get to know him a lot more in future chapters, knowing that it's like a long-ass manga series that he's probably has some like dark history that we will learn. And this prologue is just, like Ollie said, like a great way to like establish the character like now. And as we learn more of his story, we get kind of more sympathetic to him. That's what like made me wanted to read more and get that, you know, we're not getting everything that the series has offered just yet from the first 10 chapters or something.
Yeah, we see a lot of what Guts has been through in his childhood. It makes us feel towards him. What did you think of the art style?
Yeah, the mangaka is really talented. I kind of feel bad from like flicking to the like reading manga too quickly sometimes because he puts so much detail into it. But it's just like, because it's like a manga, you get that with comics as well, just any kind of like graphics novel, you just kind of look at it really quickly. Like sometimes I have to stop myself and be like, appreciate the art a little bit because there's just so much detail and the actions are quite good. But I do have to admit, sometimes I will get confused. Like I have to take like a few minutes figuring out like, because they're all wearing helmets. So you can't see the face that clearly. You have to really pay attention to what Guts' helmet looks like and how it differentiates from like the enemies or like even the Black Hawks, like what their helmet looks like to see like who's who, like during the fight scene. Apart from that, but I think it's just given for the action scenes amazing. I love those like 2-page spread ones. They're like the best ones.
Oh, yes.
Like
Agree.
background wallpaper worthy.
Yeah, pretty much same here. I really like how they use the blacks in a lot of it. There's a few scenes where, you know, like emotions are running high and you get these really intense faces with the like really deep shadowing. They're really good. And kind of like you were saying with the 2-page spreads, it's quite interesting also for me seeing how it's been influenced by other media and how it's then gone on to influence others. For me, namely Dark Souls. You get a lot of this art that's really iconographic. Not sure if that's a word, but we're making it one. Where, you know, there's one shot of a city and I'm like, that's just straight up Anor Londo, or more Anor Londo is that. And like, you can't see this if you're listening to this on SoundCloud, but Suellen has straight up the Taurus demon behind her. Also, Nosferatu Zod. And it's that kind of thing where you can see the really clear influence and how this art style has been so big. So yeah, big fan.
A lot of people have said online, and including yourself, Oliver, that Dark Souls was inspired by Berserk.
If you've played the game and read the manga, even just like a bit of it, you'll see immediately some of the parallels. You know, they've both got like the friendly blacksmith, they've got the younger blacksmith who even has the same name, Rickert. Skull Knight is straight up the same, pretty much. the Taurus demon, Nosferatu Zod, pretty easy to see. They have bone wheel skeletons in both, which are pretty iconic as well. There's also, spoilers for the very end of Dark Souls, the final boss of the Dark Souls series in the Ringed City DLC. So like the big final boss of the whole game is pretty much Guts. He's even got the repeater crossbow. So it's, there's a lot of parallels, and it works really well for both of them. You get that kind of, I guess, existential dread kind of feeling just from the art of either. And I think it works really well.
Yeah, from what I've played of Dark Souls, it's just dying constantly. And so many times we've seen Guts on the brink of death. And each time you think his injuries would just finish him off. But each time he gets up and, either continues fighting or is helped by someone. It's really interesting because of the amount of times that he's near death.
Are you telling me this is a shonen?
Were there any moments in Berserk of what you've read so far that have stood out to you?
Nothing is like too surprising, but that's not to say I haven't like enjoyed every like story and it hasn't intrigued me. But I mean, learning Guts' backstory was pretty interesting. Like you can kind of see like, that's why he doesn't want people to touch him. And that's why he's quite pessimistic about people in general and not wanting to help people, because obviously he's like betrayed in some way. I have a theory, but it's kind of obvious, but I don't know if it is. Ollie, do not confirm or deny this.
I'll just smile, don't worry.
I feel like Guts is probably sacrificed by Griffith. But good on him that he hasn't died yet. Because usually they eat them. They get dragged to hell. Also, one thing that I'm like quite curious about that I don't think it has reviewed yet is like how the sword got bigger.
Asking the most important questions.
Like, what is that not an important question? Like, it's not like they mention, he just swapped a new one as he grew taller. No, I like because we see him from his like as a child and into like his teenage years, which I'm assuming, and it just gradually got bigger and bigger. So I would assume it probably feeds off death or blood or whatever, but it's not explained, so I'm allowed to theorize.
That's fair. It is actually explained later.
Nice.
That bit is a bit less exciting. Like he just gets bigger swords. They get made for him. He just special requests like the largest sword they get times 2.
I like to think that the sword is a sentient being. It grows and develops. The character just like Guts, gets bigger and bigger.
It is fun kind of seeing the different swords, definitely. As for bits that stood out to me, it's a little harder to answer because of the amount more I read. I did really like the start of the Golden Age. And in general, I thought the arc was really well done. There's a couple of jewels that I thought were really good, and they were quite good for kind of character development and the effects of what happens to characters as a result of those jewels. It's also really interesting for me seeing the development of characters over time. And there's a few like key points throughout the Golden Age arc where characters are kind of forced to adapt, and they stuck out a lot for me. There's also one bit right in chapter like 94 where he gets a really big sword, and that bit stuck out to me a lot. It was an especially large sword, noticeably so. There's also, I guess, also the end of the Golden Age arc is pretty memorable, as I would hope the end of most arcs are.
Yeah, I think Teresia, when everyone thought that her dad was going to make her a sacrifice, I think that moment when she finds out what really happened to her mother was like, wow, like, we've read up to that bit thinking that her mother was taken by heretics and made a sacrifice, but what actually happened was he just came home and all this shit happened. So I think that's been the most memorable moment for me. And also all the homoerotic vibes we get between Griffith and Guts. It's good seeing Guts have fun and being able to laugh with other people.
Yeah, like, I guess through a modern lens, looking at Griffith, it's like, that boy's gay. What the hell? It's like, you're mine. I want you. Like, who says that? I mean, I guess, like, he's probably, like, actually really into, like, building a kingdom, and he wants, like, an unstoppable army. He's like, I want you. Almost like the propaganda of, like, the Big Brother thing. Yeah, like, I want you to enlist or something. Kind of, maybe we're reading too much into it. But I agree. They kind of, like, contrast that with, like, what's her name?
Casca.
Getting, like, wee bit jealous, you might say. That Guts is getting all the attention from Griffith.
Obviously, because they're three, I guess, main characters, Casca, Griffith, and Guts. Their kind of relationships between them do get developed more, and I would assume continue to throughout the story. For me, that was one of the big draws, was seeing how they interacted. I really enjoyed it.
So far in these 21 chapters, we have been introduced to Puck, who has come to Guts' aid quite a few times. What do you think of Puck's character and the effect that adding him in has had on the manga?
Interesting question. Obviously, there's a bit of a time leap between the prologue and the start of the Golden Age. So I can only really speak for the prologue. Guts coming in as this very much like lone warrior, he's edgy, he's got a big sword, he's called the Black, the Black Knight or the Black Warrior. He needs somebody to bounce off, right? Because otherwise it's just a man killing things in assorted places, right? So I think Puck was very much necessary to show us a bit of Guts and to give him somebody to bounce off and to talk with. I think that if it wasn't Puck, there would have had to have been somebody else. As for Puck himself, I quite like him. I like that he seems to go against Guts's creed in the prologue of only the strongest survive, and only the strongest are worth my time. Not sure why he stuck around. So if I found somebody that angry all the time, I definitely wouldn't. But yeah, I thought he worked well.
Yeah, I agree. Keep in mind, it's like the prologue, so I'm guessing Puck kind of like represents us a little bit because he's almost like the moral compass-ish for Guts, because everything he does is quite extreme and crude and cold-hearted, some might say, on the surface anyway. So Puck is like a narrative voice for us, voicing our reactions, because as readers we would probably have the same reaction as Puck. Why are you doing this? What are you doing? In a way, he's like getting a little bit more insight into Guts, and a bit of a comedic relief as well, because for such a serious manga, like the art is very detailed and facial expressions are quite realistic in some ways, that it's nice to see when it's sometimes in a gag, it's like the art style changes a little bit, and usually it involves Puck. Yeah, so it's quite nice to see. It does humor quite well, this manga.
Yeah, I quite like Puck for his comedic relief, as you said. I think in a world that's very bleak and very depressing, he offers a sort of light into this world, especially when dealing with Teresia, when Puck was given to Teresia in a cage and Teresia says, I know what it's like to be locked up. You can see Puck giving Teresia some sort of understanding, and I'm sure it made her feel better. And I quite like Puck's involvement in this series.
Yeah, he's definitely needed in the prologue to give some of that levity. If it stays dark all the time, you kind of get used to it and it's not as effective. And also, it can't be dark all the time. It's just depressing.
I don't know why when I first started reading this, it kind of reminds me of The Witcher, at least the TV show. I haven't read the books yet. How you have this dark, brooding guy, and then at least in the TV show you have, what's his name, the minstrel, if you remember.
Jaskier, there we go.
Oh yeah, I feel like it's not an exact parallel, but it's the same dynamic. Like he serves as someone who's questioning Gerald or Guts' decision of Puck and what's his name, minstrel. Yeah, because without Puck, like you said, with what's her name, Farisa, you wouldn't see her in the monologue what she's dealing with. Yeah, gives a lot of insight.
I'm not sure if this series has ended or not.
It's been kind of ongoing for years. So the first volume was in 88, I want to say. Or first chapter might have been 88. I think it was released in Japan in 1990. And we're currently on volume 40, which was released in in Japan in September of 2018 and in the UK of September 2019. It's still ongoing, but it's kind of on and off, a bit like, I guess, Hunter x Hunter.
So when this manga series comes to an end, what do you think will happen to Guts? Will it end with him dying, or him relentlessly pursuing being happy, or him being stuck in a tormented stage?
Ah, man, that's a hard one. I reckon it will just be kind of bittersweet, because I'd be shocked if this ends entirely happily. But I also think we'd get some kind of resolution. So it's hard to say, right? Because I'm so little into it. There's 357 chapters plus prologue, and I've read 97 plus prologue. Hard to say, isn't it? Yeah, I reckon Guts will probably kill all the demons and die at the same time. Or something bigger and more like ominous from, I don't know, the stars will come in. You know how it is. When it turns from like existential horror into straight up cosmic horror, could definitely see it doing that.
Yeah, I agree that it's unlikely there will be a big happy ending like a typical shonen series. Or, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if like Guts just straight up died and that's the end of the series. Because I feel like this story, it's not merciful. It shows you it can be quite cruel, like it's kind of like ooh, real life. It doesn't hesitate to show the dark side of humanity. I'm looking forward to it. I'm expecting a lot of incredible monsters for Guts to fight. He kind of reminds me of One Punch Man now. Because, you know, he's basically a One Punch Man, but with a sword, right? Like, one slice.
One slice!
He's like one slice man, right? Yeah, looking forward to it. And also, I don't believe about what you said about the sword, Ollie. It's a magical sword, and we're gonna get a whole arc just about how the sword grows.
So I think the theme of Berserk has mostly been quite dark. So I think it'll end on a very dark note. Maybe he will come to love someone and that loved one will be taken away. Maybe he just completely loses it and like becomes the strongest person alive and defeats all these demons. Yeah, I don't really have hope that it will end on a positive note, but we'll see, I guess, in like 50 years' time.
That we shall, if it's ever finished.
Will you continue reading Berserk?
For me, yes, but it's not a strong yes because I have a bunch of other stuff as well that I want to read. But it's definitely on my list. I'm not disgusted by the manga that I don't want to read it ever again, but it's definitely making me want to know more about the characters and the world. It's slowly putting me in. I will definitely continue this at some point. Probably not now.
That's fair. I've got a somewhat different perspective, having read a bit more, so I wouldn't have stopped at 21, as I didn't, because I really enjoyed that kind of seeing the character progression and the way the different characters bounced off each other and kind of seeing Guts progress both kind of physically and emotionally was really satisfying for me, as well as having that kind of draw of like, how did he get to the point that he's at in the prologue? Where I am in the manga, he's kind of where he is in the prologue. And I'm not sure now as well, partly because I really enjoyed the kind of military. Every time I'm like, oh man, I don't like military themed, shows, and then I end up loving them every time. Not sure why. Same with Full Metal Alchemist, and I really enjoyed that sense and that kind of bit, especially when it had those extra supernatural parts. So Nosferatu, Zod, and whatnot. I thought that was really interesting. When it starts getting a bit more Lovecraftian, I got a bit less interested, partly just because it was that amount darker, and I thought they had a really good balance in the Golden Age arc. So as to whether or not I will continue reading, we shall see.
I think I'd want to continue reading at a slow pace, and ideally I'd want to play Dark Souls whilst reading Berserk.
Jade, you can only suffer so much in one day.
I've seen like playthroughs of Dark Souls, so I've seen a lot of like fleshy monsters in like Dark Souls. I feel like that's probably also inspired by Berserk because there's a lot of, at least in the prologue, fleshy things coming out of things and elongating and extending itself.
Eldritch abominations. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, they're definitely like a thing, especially in the prologue. And it is kind of, they're meant to be disgusting, right? I guess you kind of get those in Dark Souls, but less so. You get more like, here's something but kind of wrong, or here's something but it kind of emotionally died a few thousand years ago, rather than like, here's a straight up abomination. It's more like Bloodborne in that respect, if we want to draw the parallels.
Is Bloodborne about blood?
Funnily enough, it may just be.
Ah, wow.
That's the funniest thing I've ever said.
Jed, please.
Which characters have you felt the most bonded to?
That's kind of difficult because there's like 3 main characters and like a series of less major characters. I actually really liked Casca I thought she was quite balanced during my read, and she had a good mix between like, kind of serious and funny, and there's like her whole. You'll see. I liked her a lot. I also quite liked what Guts was doing. I liked him a lot less in the prologue when he was kind of dark and edgy, but he worked well when he was like, "Hey, I'm kind of moody and stuff, but I'll still join in." And then you get those like the precious smiles at certain points, and I'm like, "Oh, my heart."
And then like the sad phase, I think it's near the end of a prologue where Puck thought Guts was just storming off, but he was actually crying.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to show he does feel. He's not just edge.
Yeah, same for me. I think they all, intrigue me. Like, I want to know more about every single one of them. But I guess with these types of mangas, I always end up rooting for, like, the main character. For example, like Haikyuu or, like, My Hero Academia. Like, maybe some people will be offended that I'm comparing Berserk to, like, these popular mainstream shonen shows. But just with, like, any kind of manga with, like, a big cast of characters, yeah, like I would just end up rooting for the main character because you get to know them a lot more than the other ones. And plus, I feel like Griffith must have betrayed him in some way, so I'm not rooting for him. So that's what would be my choice.
I have a quick side point on that, where I really enjoyed having Guts in the like overall story, seeming almost more like a side character, where Griffith was like the promised one, the one with the drive, the one that he's like, I'm gonna be the best there ever was, and whatnot. And Guts is more like he's strong and he's like definitely relevant, but he's not like the one. And it was nice having that kind of perspective.
I think the character that I bonded to the most was probably Guts, because I feel like he's very complex. And as you were saying, he does feel a lot. And because he's been through so much, he desires to be wanted. So I think I feel compassion towards him. So I think, yeah, I'd choose Guts. So last episode, we reviewed Kaguya-sama. And I'm going to pick Kaguya and ask you, how would Kaguya fare in the world of Berserk?
Well, that would kind of depend. If she's anywhere near the brand and the five, not well at all. But she could work quite well in the more comedic moments, I guess. And she's pretty smart, right? So there's hope. There is hope. Though it's a bit weird putting somebody from a comedy into a dark fantasy. It's a bit difficult. I don't know. I'm really not sure.
I mean, she'll definitely be like more of a Griffith type than a Guts type. Guts is like all sword.
I don't know. I
Slice.
quite like the really muscly Kaguya, just like flexing with a giant sword.
So she's definitely like the brain behind the operation. I think she'll do. I mean, aside from the fact that obviously she'll be commanding a bunch of soldiers to their deaths and killing people. But, once she gets over that hurdle, she'll probably be really good working with Griffith and helping him out. Yeah, I don't know. She'll probably be envied by Kasuga because she'll be very close to Griffith. I don't know, maybe she'll fight, but I think she'll be like, her brain is too precious to be wasted so easy because she's so small and fragile. She'll probably die straight away. Yeah, I just would imagine she's like protected.
And love is war.
Yeah.
Does that mean war is love?
Amazing.
What are your closing thoughts on Berserk?
It's good. No, I enjoyed it. It's drawing me in slowly. It pays itself out quite well. So you kind of get to see like the relationship between characters, or the story develops bit by bit. Of course, the action scenes are quite fast-paced, but that's just action. I'm definitely interested to see more of the story. However, kind of like what Jade said before, like it's probably something I will read on and off, taking it slow when I'm like, like I'm in the mood for Berserk, and I'll probably read it. And my final thought is I would recommend it to anyone who appreciates good art in manga and likes kind of dark fantasy stories. That's definitely a recommendation for someone who's a love for that genre. And even anyone who's not into fantasy, although it is quite dark, keep it in mind, but it's worth a try.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, definitely. Reading the prologue and then the Golden Age arc, I thought was a really good place. The kind of resolution you get at the end of the Golden Age arc, I thought worked quite well. I would definitely recommend it to anybody that likes dark fantasy and that doesn't mind something that is really quite bleak at points. But do be warned, if you are going in, it is bleak, and there's a lot of pretty awful stuff that happens to a lot of people in there. So do be warned. Nonetheless, it's a strong read, and if you like the kind of atmosphere of, like, you know, Dark Souls, that kind of thing, I reckon you'll like it.
I recommend this to anyone who likes demons and big swords and muscly people. And I definitely would recommend it for anyone who hasn't really read anything like this before but wants to dip a toe into it, because it throws you off the deep end as soon as you open the first page of the prologue. Yeah, I would recommend it to everybody and anybody that is interested in very dark worlds where there isn't a lot of good happening and there's a lot of violence and misery and imbalances of power, and yeah.
Don't read it during uni finals.
Yeah.
Do not do that. Bad idea.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of OCHATO, and we hope to see you next time with Princess Jellyfish. And how many chapters are we reading of Princess Jellyfish?
We are reading up to chapter 29, which is also, I think, where the anime ends. I think 28-ish. But 29, it's like right at the end of the volume. So that would be a quite nice end.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic. See you all next time.
For Princess Jellyfish.
Woo!